Today we are going to be looking at worship. And the aspect of worship that we're going to be looking at is why do people worship? Well, it is natural that if people worship, they are going to have a reason for worshiping. And so we are looking at why people worship. Before looking at the why, let us look at the objectives for today. The objectives of our lessons are why do people worship? Common elements of worship, different forms of worship, the times of worship, and what influences persons' choice of faith. Well, before we go any further, we want to look at the definition of worship as defined in the textbook that we will be using. According to our textbook, the definition of faith is showing love and respect to God by carrying out certain appropriate actions, which may include singing hymns. So, what we are seeing now is that the singing of the hymns would be a part of worship. But worship is really showing love and respect. So you do the hymns to support, you do prayers to support, you do exhortations in worship, dance and movement in worship to support this love and respect for whatever being you're showing love and respect to. Yes. Well, when you show love and respect in an evangelical setting or a Pentecostal setting, what persons do, they close out their neighbors in terms of the person sitting beside you, before you, behind you, so that they can focus on God. Yes, that's what happens. Now, according to the definition of worship, as we take it a little further, worship in the form of devotion may also be given to a human being or an object. So, whether persons think they are serving or worshiping the true God or not, there are other persons who have their gods. Maybe that God is a human being, or maybe that God is an object. They still give worship to that God. So, worship, then, as we are looking at it, is very broad. There are some words that we need to know. These words are the words associated with worship, and we will look at them. Just a glance at them. But this lecture will be made available on the Google Classroom, on YouTube, or on whatever platform that you can access it. The words associated with worship are worth, devotion, adoration, idolatry, sacred writings, liturgy, response, prayer, rite, commitment, reverence, religious rites, exhortation, faith. Those are the words associated with worship. So, at some point, these words are going to come into our discussion as they relate to worship. Worship is the main way of communicating with God or divine beings. So people are serving God, but then they have to communicate with God or their divine beings. This is a Christian world that we live in, the hemisphere. But the Hindus will tell you that their God is Brahman, spelled Braman, or Brahman, pronounced Brahman. Yes, but they worship to communicate with their divine being, Brahman, right? Up on the screen now, it says, worship provides meaning and purpose in life, right? So this would be a Hindu family, but religious people discover God's will and purpose for their lives. Many religions begin their day with thoughts of the divine. So what this Hindu family is doing, they are actually offering worship and sacrifices to their gods. They will wipe down or bathe their gods, shine them up with what is called ghee. We would know that as butter. But that is their form of worship and showing love and respect to their God. Worship can do a lot of things. We looked at this before, just now. We looked at worship providing a means or providing meaning and purpose in life. Now we're going to look at worship in terms of conflict resolution. Worship can provide a means of solving conflicts. And this happens because of the togetherness when people come together to worship. Worship helps to solve conflicts. Worship breaks down barriers. The barriers that we are talking about now, they are racial barriers, barriers of wealth and poverty, barriers of education and ignorance. In other words, some persons are educated, some are not, some are wealthy, some are poor. But in the context of worship, when persons come together to worship, it doesn't no matter whether you are rich or you are poor, whether you are educated or you're ignorant. What worship does, worship breaks down those barriers. Okay? How are barriers broken down? Barriers are broken down when we admit wrongs and forgive people. So two persons are having a conflict with each other. What needs to happen is that to resolve a conflict, one party admits that he or she is wrong, and then the other party forgives. And that is how a conflict is being solved. Right? Building a community, worship provides support, comfort, and a sense of community. What we are looking at there is a Muslim set but they worship, and it's no different from when a Christian worship. It provides that sense of community where, in other words, everybody is a part of this club or a part of this organization, and they feel a sense of togetherness, a sense of oneness, and a sense of unity. Worship is also used to sustain faith. Worship helps to sustain faith in that it guides person's conscience and strengthens their religious conviction. So, whatever conviction you have, when you go to worship, that is being reinforced, that is strengthened. It is strengthened when you do the movements, strengthened when you sing the hymns, strengthened when you listen to the exhortation of the preacher in a Christian setting or the imam in a Muslim setting. That's what happens. So it sustains faith. Prayer is a part of worship. Prayer. Through prayer, worshippers express four religious feelings. And it is important to know these four religious feelings. One, adoration, commitment. Three, devotion. And four, faith. Know those. Prayer is asking, praising, communicating. So prayer is one of the best ways for a person to communicate with his God. But then different people pray different ways based on what they practice and what they believe. The Rastafarians, they pray differently from how Christians would pray. But what lessons like these will do is that they will teach us to be tolerant of each other. So people pray depending on their belief and the teaching of their religion. Right? A number of religions, though, believe that they should kneel to pray. In generic term, it is known as genuflection. Yes, genuflection. You can pray before your images. That's what the Hindus do. But Jews and the Christians wouldn't really pray, before an image. Yes. Music and movement in worship. Music plays a part in many types of worship. Movement, on the other hand, expresses both enthusiasm and intensity of devotion. In some cases, some persons don't use worship with music. However, a number of churches, especially the Pentecostal churches, apostolic churches, evangelical churches, they will use music in their worship. Pentecostals believe that your feelings must be expressed during the worship. And so they are going to include music in their form of worship. Now, what I'm going to be doing is to give us an idea of apostolic worship when they are worshiping, how They worship without themselves and more of the Spirit in worship. So it's all about God. It's all about their God and less of self. So they put everything into it. This song says, I'm feeling very happy talking about the Lord. So let's go on and on talking about the Lord. Yes, it says, I'm feeling very happy talking about the good old way. I'm feeling very happy talking about the Lord. So that is the Pentecostal type, or the apostolic type of worship. In worshiping, though, people bring in their sacred writings or their sacred book. For example, Christians use the Bible. So sacred writings are a part of worship. So there are exhortations given, but the exhortations will come from the sacred books. So when the imam is going to preach in an Islamic situation, he's going to take his sermon from parts of the Quran. When the Christian is going to exhort or preach or teach, he's going to take his exhortation from the Bible. So each of the world's religion has its own writings. Well, for the Jews, it will be the Torah. For Muslims, it will be the Quran. For Hindus, it's the Vedas. And there are 4 different types of Vedas, and we could look at those. For example, the Rig Vedas, the Sama Vedas, the Atharva Vedas, and the Yajur Vedas, or Veda. Yes, so sacred writings and exhortation would come from the various source of writings. And the purpose that the exhortation serves is to encourage worshippers to live by the beliefs of their religion. Yes. And that is why when you go to worship, that togetherness actually strengthens your faith, because the exhorter would actually encourage worshippers to live by their beliefs or to practice what they preach then in relation to their religion. Let us now look at religious rites in worship. But this rite is not R-I-G-H-T, but as we saw earlier on, it's R-I-T-E-S. Religious rites in worship, rituals help people to prepare for worship. For example, leaving one's shoes at the door or doing ceremonial washing. So The Muslims, for example, they believe in what is called wudu, W-U-D-U, right? And that is washing from your head to your toes, right? You would wash your face, you would wash your hands, for example, going straight down to your feet before going into the masjid or the mosque to worship. They want to know that you are entire clean. And they don't go into the masjid, the place of worship, the Muslims' place of worship, with their shoes on. They take off their shoes and they enter in there barefooted to worship their God, known as Allah. So let us look at ceremonies. Ceremonies are from the womb to the tomb. You can remember that. Easy to remember. Good rhyme. From the womb to the tomb. They are centered around the most important times in a person's life. So, when a Christian baby is born, that baby is christened, for example. In some cases, the ceremony would even start before the birth of the child. The Hindus would pray that God would give them a wonderful child, a bright child, and they would think of a name that is auspicious, like the name of one of their gods, to give to this child. So the ceremonies are from the womb to the tomb. Well, let's jump the gun a little bit by saying Hindus have 18 samskaras, known as 18 practices that they practice from the womb to the tomb. Sacraments in worship. Sacraments are holy activities such as baptism and the Eucharist, which is communion. So, when a child is born in a Christian family, if it's a Pentecostal setting, they would have baby christening or baby dedication in an evangelical setting. However, if it's a Catholic setting or an Anglican setting, they would actually carry out baptism. They would baptize that child. And we're going to look at how that child could be baptized. But first, let us look at the Holy Communion. The Holy Communion is a central act of worship in the Catholic and Anglican churches. This is partaking of bread and wine administered by a priest. Right? So in an Anglican or a Catholic setting, they can do and will do communion for every service, even a funeral service. Right? Because this is their central act of worship. This is what they believe in. So because it is their central act for worship, in other words, everything would be communion for them. Right? So if you're going to church on a Sunday morning, expect to have communion. Right? There is a belief about Catholic that is called transubstantiation. That's a big word. Transubstantiation. And we're going to look what that means in regards to the Holy Communion. Catholics believe that the bread and wine become the physical body and blood of Jesus. Right? Or become the blood and body of Christ. Right? It is called transubstantiation. So when they are giving the communion to the brethren, whether you line up to take it the priest would come around to serve you. This is why it is central in their practice and central to their belief, because they believe that they are taking the actual blood and body of Jesus. The wine represents the blood of Jesus, and the bread would represent his body. What this is talking about is the crucifixion of Jesus. Right? Jesus' body was broken for us, in other words. So that communion represents his blood that was spilled, or his blood that flowed from his body. And the bread would represent his flesh that was broken, or his body that was broken for us. So the communion is very important. Well, it is important in most churches, but really central for the Catholics and the Anglicans, especially the Catholics. Well, the baby, as I said before, is christened in an evangelical setting and in a Christian setting, but this is what happens in a Hindu setting in terms of the dedication of infants. Hindus have a red thread ceremony. That's what they do. And a guru or a teacher would perform that ceremony for a boy. Christians baptize their babies at the font. Jewish boys are circumcised. Muslim babies are told the adhan. That is something that the father of the child would whisper into the ears of the baby. And you can know what is being whispered. He would say something like, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet." So that is how they would do it. Well, I'm going to be putting on the screen now the picture of a font. And if you look in the Anglican chapel, toward the back of the chapel, you will see something looking like this. Concrete with a lid on top. And that is where, right on top there, is where the water is stored. So the priest would take the baby over that and baptize that baby. Not dipping the baby into the font, but actually taking up some of the water, and touching the forehead of the baby. So once the forehead of the baby is touched, that baby is considered a baptized baby. So Anglicans and Catholics baptize their infants at the font. Okay. Now, when you're baptized at the font, as an infant, you don't know that you're baptized. Many churches are against infant baptism because some people believe that the baby does not understand what it is doing. However, what the Catholics and the Anglicans do, they baptize their babies, but when the child reaches a particular age, or all the children who have been baptized, when they reach a particular age, they attend a confirmation service to confirm their baptism. In other words, you are going to confirm whether you accept your baptism as a child, all right, or not, since you were not of age and you did not understand. If you do not confirm, then you don't go to the confirmation service. But if you go to the confirmation service, it means that you have confirmed your baptism. So for the Anglicans and the Catholics, there will be no need to be baptized again because you were baptized as a child. And so that is why they practice infant baptism. Infant baptism, to some extent, can be justified. When you read Acts chapter 16, where Paul was placed in prison, God rescued him from the prison by sending an earthquake, and the jailer picked up his sword. Back in those days, it was not guns, but sword and shield. So he picked up his sword to kill himself. Paul said to him, "Do yourself no harm. We are all here." And so he asked Paul, because he was now convinced that these men were true Christians. So he asked Paul, "What must I do to be saved?" And Paul said to him, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, you and your household." Everybody in your house, or everyone in your house. Everyone in your house, or the household, um, means that even the youngest of child in your household. So that is why Anglicans and Catholics baptize their babies. So the baby is 3 months of age, fine. That baby is a part of your household. So that is the scripture used to justify infant baptism. Some time ago, this year, this past academic year, one grade 10 student for our SBA, yes, for SBA, she looked at infant baptism. So maybe other students can look at that for an SBA in future. Um, the significance of infant baptism in the Catholic Church, or the Catholic and Anglican churches. But a very interesting topic. Um, there's a picture on the screen of a guru, which is a teacher, giving the sacred thread to a Hindu boy. And that thread is given at a certain age and stage of his life. Well, around 11, it is thrown over the right shoulder and comes down on his hip. In terms of Islam, a father whispers the call into the ear of his child about Allah and the Prophet. He leans over and he does that. He sees it as a duty in doing that. So they actually initialize their children. Some persons don't think even studying religious education in school is important, but it is important to know what the different countries, peoples, and cultures practice around the world. That helps to make us cosmopolitans, meaning we are not just citizens of Jamaica or the Caribbean, but we become citizens of the world. So anywhere we go, we understand people culture, and we can therefore live with them. All right. So if you don't understand people's culture, what is going to happen is that you're going to be at odds with them all the time. And UWI, for example, may not be able to facilitate all of the students who want to do medicine. So if you apply to UWI or any other university in Jamaica and you're not able to get through, then you can apply. Some students study in Cuba, some study in India. But when you go to India now, it's a different scenario altogether. Some students went as far as Iraq to study. So it is important that when you are educated and you go to Iraq, for example, you will know how to abase and abound, because these people are very, very serious about their religion. All right, I'll tell you a story that I told some ladies some time ago. Uh, a young lady went to India to study medicine. However, she was deregistered because she actually upset the people. Hmm? As the story goes, she was eating a banana. A monkey came and, just snatched the banana from her. What did she do? She got up and she actually, you know, hit the monkey. All right, as we would say in Jamaica, you would land it one kick. Somebody saw it and reported it. Now, this is nothing to a Jamaican because the monkey is just an animal. We don't treat, we don't, yes, yes. Okay, some persons may not be trying. If you got through, then the others can get through. So just put it in the WhatsApp group for me that they need to maybe try capital D. Maybe some persons are using common D. Try that for me, please. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you very much. It is going to be made available. Right. But put it in the WhatsApp group for me that they need to try something else because we have a few persons who got through so they can get through. Thanks much. I appreciate that. All right, let's talk about marriage. Christian marriages take place when a man and a woman enter into a long life union and make promises before God. And a very important definition. Let's put back that definition up on the screen. Christian marriages take place when a man and woman enter into a long life union and make promises before God. I really just want to leave that definition of marriage as it is for now. Yes, as it is for now. Uh, it came on the news the other day, and I hope you ladies have this in your journal because it came out on the news just the other day here that the Pope has come out to say that there's a sense in which they can accommodate uh, homosexual relationships. Right? I don't know if that's a good move at this time, but they are now saying that in some cases, the Catholic Church was very, very, very intolerant of such behavior. But the world is changing. And so later on, this definition of marriage could be changed. Right? But normally, marriage is seen as a long life union between a man and a woman, and God as the center of that union. All right, there are two things that we want to look at. We want to look at individual worship and corporate worship. And we want to see the differences between these two kinds of worship. First, let us look at individual worship. Individual worship is the personal worship of God, which is an essential part of worship in most religion. Right? So, yes, an essential part. A person then does not have to go to the place of worship to worship in terms of individual worship. You don't have to go to the place of worship. The Muslims go to the masjid, the Christians go to the church, Hindus to the mandir, the Muslims to the mosque or the masjid. But in terms of individual worship, you don't need to go to the place of worship. Individual worship means that you are by yourself and you read from your text, whatever your holy book is, you read that. And you sing and you pray and you worship your God at home. And in some cases, the Hindus especially, they have a God in every community. They would have a shrine in their houses. There are parts in there or apartments in the house that would, carry a shrine. So they would go there and they would do their individual worship or prayer. So that is individual worship. The personal worship of God, which is an essential part of worship in most religion. Yes. The individual worship, as I indicated before, usually consists of prayer and the reading of holy books. So if you are a Muslim, for example, and you are doing your individual worship, you would read the Quran, you know. Okay, we're going to do that. By right, I wanted to do both at the same time, but we're going to post it. Thanks. Let us look at corporate worship. Corporate worship is the meeting together of believers for worship, example, in their temple. So if you are Christians, you would be in church. If you are Muslims, you would be in the masjid. Persons gain strength from meeting with others who share the feelings, belief, and experience of the same. So that is corporate worship. In other words, worshiping together. You share the same feelings, the same beliefs, the same experiences. Right? So if you're asked what is the difference between corporate worship and individual worship, that, yes. Okay, I think they're having some problems with the ID. If they can look at the ID, okay. I see, I see two people. Thanks. They would have missed some of the lessons, but as I promised, we would actually make the lessons available on the various platforms, for example, in the Google Classroom, so that they can access the information and play the tapes at their own pace. So we have just looked at corporate worship and individual worship. How about some similarities and differences in corporate worship? Similarities of religion in terms of the corporate worship. All of these religions have places of worship. All collect offerings and say prayers. All use rituals. All use music and sounds. So that would be the similarity in terms of corporate worship. Yes. Let us now look at the differences, if there are differences in corporate worship. Christians worship in a church. And you know, church buildings are not created or made in one way. But most churches are shaped on the ground like a cross. If you should be, flying over the church building, you would see that the shape is like a cross. Muslims worship in a masjid, Hindus in a mandir, the Jews in a synagogue. So that would be the differences, or the sharp differences in terms of corporate worship. While the Jews gather, though, in their synagogue, they would gather on the Sabbath day. Some Christians in the church would gather on the first day. Some others would gather on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath day. The Muslims, as we will see later on, would gather on Fridays. So Friday would be their day. And we're also going to look why they think they should gather on a Friday. But these are the differences and similarities in the context of corporate worship. And as I indicated, the differences have to do with the times of worship as well. So most Christians are going to worship on a Sunday. Some will worship on Saturday, while Muslims will worship on the Friday. But all the worship is still known as corporate worship. So though they come together to worship, they have differences in their worship. Now, here's a nice word. Well, at least sounds nice. The Jumu'ah. The Jumu'ah. The Jumu'ah is the name of Friday prayers in Islam. Right. So that's what they call the service. Just like how we would have a service in Christianity and we call it confirmation service or a crusade or something like that. They have the Jumu'ah. And this takes place on Friday. After the Imam preaches a sermon, the Imam would be their instructor or their preacher. Yes. So the Imam preaches the sermon. And this happens just after midday in the masjid. The masjid is the place of worship. So what they believe is that Allah, which is their God, completed creation on a Friday, and he made the first man, Adam. Right? So what you will see is that all men in Islam have a duty to attend the Jumu'ah. right? Because worship is for the men. Well, the women also go to the masjid, but they have a different, apartment that they go into. They cannot go and worship with the men. The Jews are the same thing. Orthodox Jews don't really mix their worship because worship is really for men. By the way, you're going to say this is funny, but guess what? We have it in the Christian religion as well. Yes, we have it in the Christian religion. There's a church denomination in Christianity known as the Brethren Church. Yes, the Brethren Church actually believe in as the name suggests, brethren. They actually believe in the brothers then worshiping. So yes, the women take part, but they don't do everything. For example, the women are not able to teach or to give an exhortation or to preach a sermon. They may ask the women to take up an offering, you know, jobs like those. Right? So when it comes to worship, it's a male thing for the Muslims. So every man, if possible, must find themselves at the Jumu'ah. The difference between the Jumu'ah though and the Sabbath is that these men would leave their work. It's after midday, so if they start working already, they would leave their work to come to the Jumu'ah, but they would not totally close down work for the day. It's not a Sabbath day for them. It's not a Sabbath keeping day. It's a day of prayers and worship. Yes. Now, let us go into some different languages. And, well, one language, at least the Islamic language or the Arabic. And we're going to be speaking in tongues for this one. Because the Muslims pray 5 times a day, seen as worship. So this time a day prayer, we are going to learn their times. They pray at Fajr. The interpretation of that is sunrise in English. And this takes place before sunrise. They also pray at Du, which is noon. And this is after work begun. They also pray at Asr, which is afternoon. This is a very, very busy time, the time of Asr. Very, very busy for all Muslims. But why they pray at Asr is because they want to make sure that in their busy schedule, they can find time for Allah. They also pray at Maghrib, which is sunset. And they pray at Isha, or Aisha, right, which is the evening. And Aisha is before the day finishes. So it is from Fajr to Aisha. From Fajr to Aisha. In other words, Allah must begin their day and end their day. That's how they see it. They are committed. They are committed to worship. They are committed to praying. They are committed to worshiping. Well, I told you a short story before. I'm going to tell you another one as I come upon the Muslim religion and in terms of the 5 times for the day that they worship or the 5 times of the day that they pray. And I'm saying to us that it is very, very important for us to not learn about religion only, but apply it. One of the main reasons that we, you know, educate ourselves about religion and why the CXC University and the Ministry of Education would uh, be interested in religious education in schools is for us to educate ourselves in such a way that we are able to live with zest and live with the rest of the world. So if you don't know about religion, you won't be able to tolerate religious people or live with them. And you won't get through either. So the story goes that this young lady, this student, loved religious education. And so she wanted to do religious education in grade 10 and 11. But her mother never thought that, Ari made any sense. She just couldn't see where Ari would fit into her career. So she discouraged her from doing the subject. But you see, there is something called integration, where all subjects are integrated. So they embrace or they brace up each other. Once a student, is educated in all of these disciplines, what these disciplines do is to create an equilibrium, or in other words, a balance in the student's life to make the students well-rounded. So the story continues. She dropped Ari at third form and never did it. But then now, in upper school, when she went on what was called job experience, she wasn't, well, she was not aware of where she was going, but the school would send the students to, various places to do job experience. And she pushed the door and she saw a mat. She took the mat, put it down at the doorway, and she wiped her foot, or she wiped her feet on the mat. When she wiped her feet on the mat, the boss was very upset. He was upset, and I'm going to tell you why he was upset. He was upset because he was a Muslim, and this mat was his prayer mat. The mat that she wiped her feet on was his prayer mat. So he chased her away, asked her not to return. Not only that, but he went further to call the school and ask the school not to send any more of their students to his place. All right. So these persons that they call Muslims, they are very, very serious when it comes to their religion, and they are very, very committed to it. You don't come between them and their religion. So religion is such an integral part of this world. If you know religion, you could save yourself a lot of embarrassment. I'll tell you one last story before we move on. Another young lady, she did food and nutrition in school. Yes, she did food and nutrition. And so she could really cook. And rich Jewish family in the United States decided that they were going to take her up to cook. But you know what happened? When she went up there, the first meal that she cooked and gave them, although they were the ones who paid for her transportation in terms of flying her over, they put her on the next plane to return home. Why? Because they did not like or appreciate her cooking. What did she do? She gave them pork to eat. No, if she had just you know, if she had just had a sound knowledge of religious education, she would have known that Jews don't eat pork. None at all. Right? They don't eat pork. And that is what made them very, very upset with her. So we have to bear these things in mind, that we are not just studying them for book's sake, but they actually help us in our careers in life. Now let us look at a person's choice of faith and what influences a person's choice of faith. And we're going to take a break after this, and then you're going to take a break for, say, 6 or 7 minutes, and then you're going to return, and we're going to do a question and answer segment after you return. Yes, a person's choice of faith. There are factors influencing it. Your parents can influence your choice of faith. So you're an SDA. Why? Because your mother and father are SDAs. The media can influence your choice of faith. Sacred writings can influence your choice of faith. In other words, you read the Bible for yourself, and when you realize that God is real, that makes you to become, or helps you to become, a Christian. Other persons too, other people can influence your choice of faith. And how do they do this? They do this by witnessing to you. So they witness to you, and they, encourage you to change your life and to find faith in the religion. And they would provide the various reasons you should find faith in the religion. Other things influence, though. For example, the person's birthplace, your ethnic origin, evangelism too. Preachers who set up big tents and preach the gospel. You are convicted, and immediately you are convicted, you are being baptized and accepted into the church. Right? And it can come from your personal conviction. Personal conviction sometimes work when neither mother or father is a Christian or is a religious person of whatever religion, but the son or daughter would read the holy book that they come across, and by reading they are convinced that God is real and what the Bible says is real, and therefore turn over their lives to God and become religious persons. So your personal conviction is one of the reasons for faith. Evangelism, right, can influence your faith. A person preaching the gospel is called an evangelist. The word gospel comes from euangelion, which is evangelist. These persons convince you to accept their faith. And so it doesn't have to be a tent crusade. It can be, a crusade at the church or in some auditorium. But they get evangelists to preach and to convince people and to turn over their lives. Other religious groups also share their beliefs with non-believers. These religious groups are Judaism, Islam, Rastafari, etc. If you are personally convicted, you would do so by, as I said, reading from the text that you come across, right? The Muslims have the Quran, the Christians have the Bible, the Jews have the Torah, the Muslims have the four Vedas. A person's birthplace also would influence. Right? A person's birthplace influences his belief or her beliefs. If one is born in a particular race or country where he or she is taught certain things, the person will hold to that teaching. And so this is how religion influences people. The media, finally, this is the last thing we're looking at. The media serve as a source of influence. Listening to songs, preaching, teaching, watching stories from the media influences a person's choice of faith. Yes, and so these are most of the things that we need to learn with regards to why people worship. So this somebody has a question? This lecture though will be placed in the Google Classroom so that those who did not get on would actually see the information and make a note. Yes. All right. Okay. Please repeat. Hello.